If you have a prankster in your family, you know that the holidays are their time to shine. Over-decorated trees, fake Santa Claus and reindeer tracks in the snow, ice down the back of your shirt, surprise, snowballs in the house. These are the stock and trade of the playful dad come December. But if hearing sleigh bells turns you into a merry prankster, then you know there's only one true test of your mischievous skills when Christmas is approaching: the gift wrapping. Some families have stories about in-laws using too much tape on a present to make it impossible to open without scissors. If the prankster is really spiteful, they might mummify a gift in duct tape just to watch you squirm. But nobody will ever outdo Roy Collette and Larry Kunkel, the in-laws who became superheroes of trolling each other with their gift-wrapping jobs. How devious were their gift-wrapping skills? Imagine this if you can. A Minnesota Christmas is cold to the bone. And in 1981, there is no Amazon Prime. So when a truck pulls up with a crushed car on a frozen flatbed trailer, you'd be confused, right? Just like Roy Collette was. Then he found the letter wishing him a Merry Christmas. The note inside explained that the twisted metal 3x3 cube used to be a sedan, a 1974 Gremlin. And inside the 2,000-pound scrunch car was his Christmas gift. It was in the glove compartment, if you want to get technical. All Roy had to do to get his gift was grab a cutting torch and a jaws of life and unwrap his present. And of course, that's exactly what Roy did. He very slowly, very meticulously unwrapped the crushed car. Inside, he found a pair of moleskin pants. The same pair of moleskin pants the brothers have been gifting each other year by year in more elaborate wrappings. Because for a prankster, Christmas is a competitive holiday. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-da on the internet and get to the facts.
Corporate greed, lies and money, excesses, selfishness, suits, and gluttony. These are the things we've been taught make us rich. But on today's episode, these concepts we ditch. To get us into the spirit of things, we're proving that selflessness can make us kings. That monetary success is even more attainable if we practice giving away in a way that's sustainable. And being selfish and rich is a temporary plan until the public mistrusts you and you're forced to rebrand. So here are our myths to help us along, to prove that the selfish have got it all wrong. Myth 1. Looking out for number one is our natural state. Humans are designed to hoard wealth and procreate. No more, no less. Myth 2. Sure, selflessness for the individual might be evolution's normal, but for business and economy, it's rare and informal. Myth 3. Is there anywhere selflessness doesn't win out? What about greedy businesses that get a bailout? We're going to get to our generous myths, but first I want to tell Joe about our gift-giving Smiths.
So that is a really strong start as far as like setting the bar for Christmas wrapping, putting a crunched gremlin around the present. Okay, I got to ask, where did that start? Because that can't possibly be the first gift exchange.
Well, it started when Larry Kunkel, his mom gave him a pair of moleskin pants. And he wore them once. But they are in Minnesota. Minnesota in the wintertime is freezing cold to the bone. And moleskin pants in the winter freeze. So, like an icicle. It's not very comfortable, right?
So he's walking around in pants that like any parent gives you like a pair of pants or a shirt, and you're just like, oh, thanks, and you wear it once to get them off your back.
Yeah, you wear it when you go visit them the next time, and then never wear it again.
Okay. So why didn't he just donate this to Goodwill like any sane human being?
I think that these two brother-in-laws had the exact same sense of humor. I think they were thick as thieves. Like, you and I laugh at each other's jokes, but we have different sense of humors, right?
Yeah, I would say that's true.
But these guys have the same sense of humor. So he thought it would be hilarious to gift it to his brother-in-law and annoy him for a day or two.
Okay. So brother-in-law gets the moleskin pants, and then he has to wear cold, frigid, stiff, starch-like pants for a day.
Larry sends it to Roy, and Roy doesn't get him. He wears them one day and gets annoyed, and he packages them up and send it back.
Okay. So the first time it goes back and forth, it's just in a normal package?
Yep, it's just it's just a yearly thing. Like, you gave me this for Christmas, I'm going to give it back to you. You know, like any regift anything. But then, once he got it back, Colette twisted the pants. He stuffed it into a 1-inch wide, 3 foot long pipe and mailed it back. So then it was game on.
So that's like stuffing. That's like I'm imagining like when you load a rifle in like the Civil War, like you're tamping it in.
So the game started, and there were no rules. Right, it wasn't even a game yet. But as the years went on and the game evolved, so did the rules. And the rule they had was it had to be a moral thing. They had to do this morally, and they had to do it legally. So they couldn't do it.
Okay.
No felonies or misdemeanors. And they had to keep the wrapping to a minimum cost. They didn't want to blow much money on it. So they wanted to be creative and thoughtful, which is a sign of what? A really good gift.
True. Are you telling me that crunched, that 3x3 cubed gremlin was at cost?
Those cars didn't cost anything brand new. Those cars were pieces of shit. It was probably a $500 car when they were brand
Gave
new.
it away.
Yeah, a used Gremlin didn't have a good resale. Didn't have a good blue book value.
Oh my God. Can I pretend that he got it from a dealership? And can I also pretend he told the dealer what he was going to do with the car?
This has got to be rich people.
So what is the most elaborate packaging you've ever used to gift somebody?
I can't think of anything that I've done that's outrageous or, my stuff is usually I will go and pay someone to do a professional job so it doesn't look like a kindergarten kid did it.
Oh, okay.
But I consider myself pretty thoughtful and spend time on the gifts I buy. I think about what the person would like. And what about you?
I think the most elaborate packaging, my family does this. We over-package things for fun. I've gotten the package that are strapping tape. I got a Christmas present once for my family that was like woven strapping tape, so you could not get into it and you weren't allowed to use scissors. I've never gotten pants stuffed into a pipe before. That would be completely new.
I did get that. We went to that Christmas party for our Toastmasters, and I got that monster box that looked like it had something expensive in it, and I think I got like a toilet plunger. Do you remember that party?
Oh, I remember the gag gifts. Yeah.
No, it was just mine.
It's just yours.
Everyone else got bottles of booze and something that they could use, appliances. I got that.
Right.
Our rich host thought it was hilarious. So as far as thoughtfulness and cleverness gets going, Kunkel, the next move he had, the next Christmas he did, he got a window company, to mount the pants inside an insulated window. And then it was warranted for 20 years. So it looks like you just won these pants award, like the Grammy or... That's pretty funny.
I like that. When I heard about this story, I did not read every bit of hijinks from this. I let you surprise me with those. But when I first heard about this, my first thought was, they've got to be rich. But now that I'm sort of like getting them back in like an insulated window, that makes me think these guys were just funny. Like they talk to companies locally, and who's not going to want to participate in a prank like this?
Yeah, they traded just to be for the press.
Right. So I know that what they're doing is inherently like this pranksterism isn't necessarily selflessness. But would you consider what they're doing to be an act of giving? Like they're entertaining themselves, but from the pictures on Wiki, it seemed like there were a lot more than just these two guys involved.
I'm flattered when someone in my friend group will tease me about things. I mean, it shows that they've been thoughtful.
Right.
They've been paying attention to me. So yeah, I think this is a creative competition based on love.
Okay. Would it surprise you to know that giving things and being selfless, first off, is sexy?
It does a little bit. I've heard that's one of the love languages is gift giving, and I wanted to study some more of that.
I think that these two nut jobs, Larry and Roy, they were both married, right? Like they were brothers-in-law for a reason.
Yep.
Is it fair to say that them having humor in their gift giving is probably something that like is more telling about their personality? Like, don't you feel like you really know them because they're willing to crush a gremlin around a pair of pants? So let's start with our first myth. What is selflessness good for? If we're just talking about like all of our episodes have the same basic starting point, by the way. If you've ever listened to this, you know where we're going. Why would this trait be in us as a primitive man, like from the start? Why would we start out with selflessness as sort of a default?
You're saying that to make us more attractive.
Yes. Part of it is attractiveness. Part of it is selflessness. We've talked in other episodes about how selflessness helps us survive. It helps us sort of like keep the tribe around us healthy. And of course, doing what Larry and Roy did, which is like being selfless in a way that is humorous and entertaining, is double points. That makes you a tribal leader, basically. So we're going to talk about a Scientific American study, if you don't mind. If you don't mind me boring all of this pranksterism around the holidays with a little bit of study.
Doesn't sound sexy so far. Just from that opening line.
Right. This comes from an article called "It Takes Effort to Be Selfish." And that's where a lot of our points are going to come from today, because I found this article so fascinating. First off, being selfless is actually sexy. It's not just your teacher telling you that people are attracted to selfless people, or your mom telling you that, be a giving person. You'll be liked more. People will, want to be around you. It is actually true. From Oxford, they did a study where they looked at 32 heterosexual women and 35 heterosexual men. And they had them rate the attractiveness of the opposite sex in the presence and the absence of information about helpful behaviors. So this is kind of science speak for saying that their lab technician was their wingman for that day and was like, hey, you like my bro here? He totally donates to charity. He saved an orphan from a fire once. So... they didn't say exactly in the study what the quote presence of information about helping behavior was. It may not be an orphan fire, but it's something. They told them something about the opposite sex and how they donate to charity or that they are selfless.
Volunteers at the Humane Society.
Right, exactly. And they found out that helping behavior were totally associated with increases in attractiveness for both men and women as potential long-term sexual partners. Likewise, altruism also increases the attractiveness as men as potential partners for short-term flings. So being selfless, yeah.
I'll hook up with this nice guy for the night.
Exactly.
Pay him back for that's kind of cool.
So you and we had an episode long ago about attractiveness, and we talked about how altruism was looked at as attractive. Selflessness was looked at as more attractive, But the whole nice guys finishing last thing, that's usually sort of like an internet sticking point. Like a lot of people have the whole...
You're too nice. That's your
yeah.
problem.
No More Mr. Nice Guy is both a song and a book. Really what we're looking at as most people who are being nice, they're not being altruistic and they're not being selfless. When they say that they're being nice and they're finishing last, what they mean is they are doing things that are nice for an individual. They're like pulling out a chair and paying for dinner and ordering a taxi. They're doing nice things for one person. We're talking about actual altruism, actual selflessness in the larger scope of things. Now, want to hear something funny that kind of maybe makes men look a little bit bad in this?
Please.
In this same study, they found that altruism did not affect the attractiveness of women as partners for short-term flings. So guys kind of don't care if you've given to the March of Dimes and they want you as a one-night stand. Only if we're marrying you do we want to hear about how altruistic you are.
But it still means something for a long-term relationship.
Totally, yes, it does.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when they're in a lustful state, I want to unpack, kind of rewind something you said about your mom or parents teaching you that value of it's good to give and stuff. I think people nowadays are teaching kids to be selfish. Well, what's in it for you? How much are you going to make?
Right.
Well, make sure you're not getting used by them. Those conversations I think are more common.
I think those are millennial parents who have just been burned over and over again by corporations. We've done so many episodes lately about how the economy has disenfranchised people. I think that is more often the what we hear when we hear about like practical parenting. Give your teacher kids being the responsibility of money, but not necessarily selflessness and altruism. But we're going to find in this episode that selflessness and giving are still very, very much alive at an individual level. I'm not going to spoil it, but later in this episode, we are going to put the public and the individual head to head against corporations in who gives more. And I kind of want to hear your guess first on who you think is the bigger giver. Is it
corporations?
And
of course,
they
got more money.
Big donations, and they're what is it? Everyone says they're doing it for taxes.
Well, yeah. When you go and you check out, and they said you want to give $2 to this, of course you do. And then you see these commercials, and then join us in helping these causes. So there's no way individuals could outdo them.
Right. Who can beat Bill Gates giving away 10% of his money or 50% or whatever the pledge is? So we will get to that. But first we're asking, Todd and I are going to be selfish for everyone else. We're saying what's in it for us. Well, the first what's in it for us is you're more attractive. It proves to the opposite sex that you will help keep the tribe alive around you. And if you're a guy, apparently we want to grudge bang women, but we want a Mother Teresa when we try to marry. We want someone who will pick up our underwear and give to the March of Dimes.
Grudge bang? Was that in your research?
It was. I researched a lot about that. We won't get into that. You don't have to like someone to have sex with them if you're going out for a one-night stand, is what we're saying.
Oh, boy.
Do you want to hear the other half of this Scientific American study, the why it takes effort to be selfish?
Yeah, I would think it takes more effort to be selflessness.
You would think, yeah. My instinct tells me, and before I read about this, I really did believe that our default is like, okay, when a kid is given candy, and like you're looking at a brother and a sister, or like two siblings, one of them has candy and the other doesn't. You have to tell them, okay, you're going to have to share with your sibling. You have to teach them to share. Mm-hmm. You have to teach kids to be responsible and to be equitable and to be selfless.
Wait for your sister. Hold your sister's hand. Yeah, that's nice. See?
Right. And there's a flip side to this. Do you see people who give big as suckers?
Sometimes, identifying as a Christian, the big thing is tithing.
Yeah.
The Bible says it's supposed to tithe. And then you start to think sometimes you give all this money to the church, and then does the church spending it on what it's supposed to, or is it on $1 million salaries and
right
new backstages that cost elaborate stages that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and new speakers for the church? You start thinking, am I being taken? Not that I've ever given more than my 10% or been a high giver, but you wonder, kind of like, is this going to where I should?
I don't just question where it's going. I question the person doing all the giving. Like, if somebody gives too much, I either think they have a guilty conscience, or I think they are naive, that they are a sucker. Like, I really, in my sort of like, this may reveal about my upbringing, but I'm like, yeah, you're being huckstered. You are handing over too much money to that snake oil salesman.
I see it too as a status thing. I think you think of people who donate millions of dollars to the Portland Ballet. I think they do that to get more status in that culture.
That's what I assume too. So this study hit me upside the head. And actually, let me put it a different way. This study was more like having a newspaper rolled up and slapped in my nose for assuming that everybody was as, let's say, selfish or frugal as I am. Cheap, yep. They did transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is a fancy science way of saying they used magnets to throw an electrical current into part of the brain, which means they could put a charge in somebody's brain without drilling into them and putting wires into their head. So this is kind of the machine actually looks like a dentist's X-ray tool. It's on a robotic arm, and it holds coils over somebody's head. And it basically just generates a charge in front of your skull and will send like juice flowing through it.
They can see how generous you are?
Well, what that does is it doesn't see how generous you are. It gives you magnetic stimulation and disrupts your prefrontal cortex. So like people were being asked how they would split $10 with recipients on a screen. So they would like show them people on a screen. So they like got a face to look at, and then they would hit them with the juice. They would zap, like they would disrupt their thinking literally with electricity. And the prefrontal cortex, that's the planning and decision-making part of your brain. It sits on the front of your skull. So if you tap your forehead with your finger, you're pretty close to the prefrontal cortex. And by planning, when we talk about this is the planning and decision-making part of your brain, planning in this instance, we mean planning to stay rich and keep our $10 in this study. So zap, they would disrupt that planning, and they would make people, well, forget to be stingy. And it worked. Disruption of the prefrontal cortex led to greater giving on average. And they found out this region of the brain, it kind of acted like a control valve for generosity. I'll just read from their text here. Aligning its other roles in impulse control, but the impulses here look to be selfless, not selfish. But this kind of makes sense to me. Without higher functions like planning, like if the front of my brain gets disrupted, what is that guy, that Phineas Gage, the guy that had a pipe throttled through his head historically? If you disrupt my higher functions, my higher planning, I guess you're just reverting me to a child who wants to feed the ducks or give to the poor.
Right. You're not thinking about what I'm going to eat tomorrow, or is this the last $10? How scarce is money at this point?
Right. It goes from the researchers asking me, how do you want to save this $10? And my brain thinking about putting it under a mattress, putting on the stock market, putting it in my bank account. Suddenly you zap the prefrontal cortex and I'm back to being a child, and I just want to give it out. Like I'm like, give it to the homeless or feed ducks or toys to tots, whatever.
And for our listeners, Joe is very, very cheap. I don't think I can say that enough. You listen to our Miser episode about the real life Ebenezer Scrooge, Daniel Dancer. That was actually based on Joe's life.
Yeah, I'm a time traveler. That episode was just me in a wig. That episode revealed too much about me, actually. We need to go back in the archives and delete that. Now, this is actually where I want to sort of make a comparison to Roy and Larry. When I talk about how childish these guys kind of strike me as with their gift giving, and they're like, we're not going to call it selfless doing a prank over and over again, but it was entertaining for everybody else. And I will say that they got into the Christmas spirit, because nothing says Christmas and selfless and entertainment like sending a concrete rocket to somebody with pants inside. And that does happen. Sorry for the spoiler. So lastly, before we move on to our history section, we covered in another episode something that I'm just going to repeat quickly here. Stockholm University did a study once where they looked at, it was a 14-year period that they looked over, and they gauged people's altruism. And this was also sort of backed up by a British study, where they found out that people who were the most altruistic had both the most children and the highest income of all respondents. This has been backed up by multiple studies over the course of years. So this is something that has basically been accepted by the scientific community. The idea that if you're generous and you're altruistic, you generally have more kids and you have a higher income. Now, I don't know exactly why, and that's something I wanted to discuss with you. One of the things that the scientists think is that if you are altruistic and generous, you are more likely as a person to just be looking for quality relationships, and that you have more sort of like selfish people have quote unquote lower quality relationships. So I would ask you, Todd, if you see somebody, like you meet someone who's generous as a person or altruistic as a person, are those people who are usually like circulating at a party, making contacts, or are those people who would like keep to themselves?
They're definitely the ones who are working the room, inviting you over to their house. When they come to a dinner party, they always have more food than everybody else. They would always bring something, even if they're told not to. It's really who they are. And they're the people who, if they loaned you money, they probably give you twice as much as you needed.
Right.
I think they're like that in all their affairs. I don't think it's manipulation. I think when it's genuine, I think there's people who have an agenda and they will pick and choose who they spend money on. I think the people who are this way, the selflessness people I know, give money to multiple charities and are generous with all their friends and family, whether they deserve it or not.
I think that's accurate. I think all these studies are backing up an idea I had in the back of my head, which has come out in this episode, which is if you're genuinely altruistic and you are a genuinely selfless person, you probably have that throughout life, and it helps you keep connections. If we just compare Roy and Larry, these, I mean, they're using concrete and steel for good, which is to make it into a joke. Compare that to like Killdozer. Like both these guys were ridiculously inventive, spent lots of time pouring concrete, and had no business planning this level of revenge in detail, except Larry and Roy did it in a giving spirit, whereas Killdozer just wanted revenge, basically.
And I think this episode being close to Christmas and us focusing on what you can measure, which is money, which is financially buying things. But I think that people who, the real givers, and as you get older, you value this more because you have less of it as your time. And the people who are generous with their time is something I respect very much. Joe, if you think about all the work you've done with Toastmasters, all the people you've mentored, all the speeches you've written, all the contests you've gone to, evaluating, helping people with feedback, of your selflessness of giving into Toastmasters, what do you think you've gotten back out of it?
I used to believe it was less. I used to think it was like, I used to treat the time I gave to other people like it was practice for me. But over the years, the people who've come back to me and lent me a hand doing some other project or pursuit, or given me back their time, and then more so afterward, it really does pay itself back off in connections and in I couldn't say it's a one-to-one return. It sure feels like a lot more. It feels like more comes back than what you put into it.
You nailed that. And I think the key to that was, and I'll answer for you on this too, finish that thought. All the time I was spending at Toastmasters, all the things I've done for people, I did it out of just enjoying them and wanting to help them.
Yes.
Genuinely no agenda on my part. It's probably one of the only places where I didn't have an agenda.
Right.
You know, with dating, I kind of had an agenda. It's paid us back, I think, 10 times.
Yeah.
Without any expectations of it.
I would say that's true. So, speaking of time being a measure of generosity, and no doubt some of these really insane wrapping jobs they did must have taken months to accomplish. I need to hear about a couple more of these. You've tickled the only bone in my body that reacts, which is the prank bone. I would say it's a funny bone, but really it's just I like pranks.
People love. I'm not a prankster, but these people love all these prankster shows. I think the impressive part of this, if this was a prankster show, it ran from 1974 all the way to 1989.
That's so crazy. And I can't stress this enough. There's no YouTube in this time, so they're not doing it for the internet or, you know, the public's entertainment. These guys are just like, yeah, they're crushing cars for fun.
Well, it started out just wrapping in a tube, like in 1973. And then as it progressed, it got to the window. One thing I didn't tell you about the window, they had it put inside this insulated window, or glass frame, like frame, like an award. It was also bulletproof glass frame. And then things started getting bigger and heavier. They first went to a 5-gallon bucket of concrete. And then they went to a steel ashtray. Now, when you think of an ashtray, you think of a small one that the kid makes it, right?
Right.
This was a 225-pound steel ashtray.
What does a 200-pound ashtray even look like? Is that just a stove?
None of these gifts were beautiful. I can tell you from the picture. They're ugly. The gremlin looks like just a smushed nothing. It looks like smushed metal. So now we're getting into cars. Fast forward to 1982. You know, like one of those humongous tires that those power lifters push over?
Oh, the tractor tires they flip?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This would take 5 of those guys to lift this one. This one came in on a forklift. This huge tire. And then even getting more creative in 1983.
So wait. I'm sorry to stop you. It was just a tire? Like it was in the tire, or was that filled with something?
It was inside the tire. No, it was inside the tire. Great question. With 3 tons of concrete in it.
Oh my God. Okay.
Intentionally filled up. So I guess 5 strongmen could not lift this.
For half a second, you gave me hope that I could unwrap one of the Kunkel's presents, but nope, that's been dashed. Okay, sorry.
3 tons of concrete. The next year, an actual rocket ship, a 17-foot tall rocket filled with 6 tons of concrete. You see, the concrete is kind of the weight thing. Again, they got that same forklift they needed for the tire. And then in 1974, the year was 1984, they took an old Camaro, only 10 years old,
okay,
and they filled it with concrete.
These guys, so every Christmas, one of them has to grab a jackhammer to open his present, basically, is what we're at.
Now, I'm going to leave you with this one. I'm going to tease you for the next one, but this one is my personal favorite. They bring in on this humongous flatbed truck, which is something like if you got your car towed a long distance, they'd put your car on. It's a giant Rubik's Cube, and it weighed 4,000 pounds. So it weighed twice as much so it was a sign of the times. Because at the time, 1985, that would have been when Rubik's Cubes was a big fad.
Right.
And you see this picture of this guy. You can imagine this thing pulling up to your house. This like, oh, I've always wanted a Rubik's Cube, a 4,000-pound Rubik's Cube.
The biggest Rubik's Cube you've ever seen. Just imagine being a kid in that neighborhood, and like around the time you're expecting Santa, you can also expect to see a flatbed trailer with something crazy on it.
These guys would have been a great YouTube success because they were kind of like current events and
yeah,
before their time.
Right, that's what I'm thinking is they are a YouTube craze before YouTube existed. They needed to invent YouTube just for these guys.
But they have their own prankster reality show for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about the game theory of selflessness. If altruism is so sexy and selflessness is a good evolutionary trait, why does this not bear out in large groups? Why is it that we have global warming or climate change if people can't just sort of like come together and be altruistic or selfless on the big scale?
Or just in their own neighborhood, helping pay for things, or certain neighbors feel like they're above it, that they don't have to participate. And usually they're the ones with the most money.
Right. This American Life did a episode once about non-incorporated neighborhoods where like the neighbor themselves have to pay for the street lights. They have to pay for the city parks. They have to pay for the upkeep and maintenance of public goods. They have to decide how many street lamps stay on, basically. So the idea is if you have 12 neighbors, who pays to keep the street lamp on? If you don't all come together and form a committee and you don't come up with a payment system, how does that street lamp even stay on? Or do you let it go out? This is something a lot of Americans are facing right now. We kind of are entering a phase of not my problem as far as housing and neighborhood associations go. So we're having a lot more neighborhoods decide to go with, let the lawns get overgrown, let dumping happen, let all these things happen if it means you don't pay more money as an individual. Taxes kind of work this way too. So does global warming. All this stuff kind of is in the same bin of if we don't act altruistic as a group, well, then who's going to? Now,
there's no homeowners for the environment.
Right, exactly.
For the world.
Yeah, who's going to cut down on their carbon emissions first if we're talking about companies? Well, nobody's going to because they're not being incentivized. But I found a really interesting... I found a bunch of interesting studies. One of them was an episode in Freakonomics where they talk about a book called Nudge. And a lot of their discussion talks about how the real incentive behind altruism as a group is competition. And I started looking this up online and digging and digging and digging. And the best example I could come up with is it's a Max Planck Institute of Economics in Jena, and they had a study where they looked into when members of a group collaborate and when they decide to act selfless. And this is mostly about sports. I'll just read directly from the study. You should follow our link.
Because if you're going to do any sports stuff, we're in trouble.
Well, it's less about a sport. It's more about like if we keep score, what happens with altruism. In fact, I'm just going to quote them real quick. They say, we knew that groups whose members cooperate are more successful, but what are the circumstances that lead to them to become active when egoistic behavior is standing in the way of the group's success? So if you are watching, say, like a soccer game where one guy wants to be the scorer, like he wants to be the all-star, and he just wants to score nonstop, but he's not passing, he's not sharing, he's not doing anything that would help the team. He wants to help himself. There was an episode of was that new show that came out about a football? He's a football coach teaching soccer. Really, Ted Lasso.
I don't know that story.
Okay, well, it's a new show, but like they even explore this on that show where they talk about how, if you are going to be good as an individual, you're not going to be a good team player. You have to actually play with your team and be selfless to make a good team player. So these researchers formed groups whose members were able to, this is how the quote unquote game went. They were given an amount of monies and they were put into their own groups, and they were put into 30 rounds of play. And they had a complex system where they would divide the amounts of money back to the groups. And if people hoarded money and acted egotistically, they would benefit, but the groups did not. So they would have scenarios or rounds where the entire team would bust because some individuals had hoarded all their money. The way they broke this behavior. So just to simplify this for everyone listening, they created a scenario very much like sports and very much like how the economy is working right now, which is you can hoard money yourself and you will win. But if everyone does that, everyone loses simultaneously. The way they explain this study, I'm just going to quote this just because it's brilliant. Quote, as soon as the group is in competition with other groups, the group members no longer wait to see whether someone else imposes the sanction to make people who are hoarding their money stop. They, quote, they act fast and bear the cost themselves for the benefit of the group as a whole. Competition was the key factor. Putting people in competition with each other in groups changed how much the individual was willing to bear the brunt of the group success.
That's interesting. So it's the prize was worth it. The status or the win was worth them not having the financial gain.
Right, exactly.
You think, well, who cares, right? At least I got out of here with the most money. But no, I'm willing to give some. Like if you're on a podcast, it's a very successful show. You're willing to even invest in it because of the winning.
Right.
And beating these other shows.
They have found this is true for sports, for money, for games. So just to very briefly recap what we just read there, if it's 30 rounds and everybody is just loosely playing and everyone can go bust simultaneously in a bad round, that's just a bad game. That's like playing poker. When you put these guys into teams and it's team versus team and one person on the team is going to hoard their money and make everybody on your team lose, suddenly people are willing to be outspoken, to punish each other, to bear the brunt of losses. Suddenly people act like there are real stakes. And that Freakonomics episode I was talking about, they found the same thing with companies. People are willing to impose sanctions on using carbon and carbon taxes, and they're willing to punish other companies that overuse their carbon tax, or what do you call it? They cheat, basically. If you build up a group in competition, like what do you call it? If a group of companies that are all working together, they are willing to punish people who break the convention out at cost to themselves because it's a competition.
It's weird. I just had this conversation with my friend last week. He's a very competitive athlete. He played college baseball. He was a very, very good pitcher. He lives on a golf course now, plays golf every day. And he said in his 40s, he finally figured out this year that it's more important when you're playing in a golf with a group of guys or ladies to be he always thought being the best golfer is the best thing, being the best, he's very competitive. He realized it's better to be good to golf with than a great golfer.
That is a great way to summarize this. We want to do that with everything. If you want to talk about the real value of altruism and selflessness, it's that. You want to be good to golf with, not a great golfer. That is the nature of how altruism and selflessness work in business, in sports, and everything.
And I'm thinking it's a little more sustainable.
Exactly. Yeah, if you listen through our opening Christmas carol, we talk about sustainable altruism and sustainable selflessness. That's exactly how you balance it. And if you want to talk about how this can be applied to America as a whole, if we treat it like a competition, we're already losing a bunch of competitions. We've got this from, we've got links to these sources in case people are wanting to look up where we got these from. But if we're talking student IQ, we're 29th. Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore, 1, 2, and 3, respectively. If we're talking best education system, we're 38th in math, 24th in science. We're number 1 for universities. If you ask our own universities, like University of Pennsylvania puts us at number one. But yeah,
your point being, we're already losing, so we need to change our approach. Because
Right.
what you're getting at is, we think we're this big bad country. We could do whatever we want, but we're not winning.
Right. Yeah, we're
In anything.
if we treat it like a competition, we are not coming in first. My favorite one was for homelessness. We're around the middle. We have 17.7 homeless per 10,000. The worst is Syria, with about 1/3 of their population being homeless. But guess who's ahead of us in the homeless rating? Russia is beating us, if you want to talk competition. They only have 4 homeless people per 10,000.
Really?
Oh, okay. Here's a crazy one. Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is beating us.
Yeah, but you wouldn't think, right?
Right. Here's my favorite one. Liechtenstein. I had to look up where Liechtenstein was. Homelessness does not exist in Liechtenstein. My favorite, this is the fact of the podcast for me. In the wiki, it says, quote, "A homeless shelter which previously existed in Liechtenstein was closed down because of lack of use."
You gotta be. That would never happen here in Portland.
No, they tried to open a homeless shelter and it just never got used. So, altruism and selflessness on a global and company scale can work. You just have to be competitive.
And Joe and I are ultra sensitive when it comes to homelessness, because where we live in Portland, it's very visible and it's very sad.
So I do at some point need to do an episode about Liechtenstein now that I know that they're on the map. Sorry if we have Liechtenstein listeners. But I do want to know did they eventually try to end the pants feud? Because it's got to be costing them money and obviously time. Was there ever a moment where they tried to call it off?
Well, they got to a point where this one went a little too far, and they had this station wagon, and it was filled with electric generators welded together. So I'm guessing to weld a bunch of generators together, to gather them up, ones that are junk ones, to take the time to put them in the car, to weld it there. I mean, this is getting extreme now.
That's like a full-time job for a month.
Exactly. And then, so that's when they made an effort to really make a truce. And they said, okay, we've been doing this for how many years now? It's time to 20 plus years. It's time to make a truce.
This prank is now old enough to legally drink. So time to end it, right?
And then but they still had the thing that these pants have not been harmed. They weren't going to destroy them. That was the truce. That was one of the rules, right? That was one of the games. So to finally end this prankster nonsense, they made a thing where they were going to destroy it at the same time. They were going to each pull on one side with their own devices and destroy it, and the game would be over.
Okay.
No winner, no loser.
Okay, that's a good truce. What was their chosen method of destruction?
So it's pretty simple. The method of destruction was pretty simple, considering all the thoughtful things they did. They were just going to tie the pants, a rope on each side, and both drive in opposite directions in an SUV.
They're going to draw and quarter the pants. Okay.
But this is what happened. Kunkel, he cheated. He sabotaged it, and he made it break off. So the pants lived, and so didn't the game.
So he's driving away with the pants flapping behind him, like the just got married cans behind your car thing.
Saying motherfucker the whole way.
Right.
God, I should have thought of that.
Okay.
Now the package that went that after the truce the game back on. We're going to keep doing this for another 20-something years. This one was crazy. You know, one of those big cement trucks you see driving down the road, and the back end of it, the mixer part, the humongous part of the truck, the biggest part of the truck is turning, so the cement won't settle. That showed up with the pants inside of it.
Oh my God. They're like, all this concrete we've poured, it's not enough. Let's get the thing that pours the concrete.
It's humongous. It looks like Apollo spaceship. filled
Wow.
with cement. Can you think of what it's just a pain in the ass it would to dispose of that?
And the pants are in there somewhere.
The pants are in there, and you've got to chip away at getting them out of there.
I
never thought of that. Just the getting it out. That would take a couple months.
That would be your new job. Here's a jackhammer and go through a cement truck worth of cement.
It's not that funny, right?
No, I'm getting tired. Like this whole episode started with these amazing pranks, and now I'm feeling exhausted for these guys.
I'm just too lazy to be this.
Okay. Well, I want to get back a little bit to our original tease, our big question: who gives more money? Who gives more to charity? Actually, companies or individuals? Now, when we started this episode, I guessed it was companies. I guessed that these charitable foundations, even the ones named after people, are technically a corporate entity. And companies every year pick, medical research, or they pick, donations and organizations to give money into.
Homelessness, cancer awareness stuff, all kinds of things.
Right. Something I hadn't really thought about, though, one is, okay, so there's a lot of arguments online about whether or not a company should give to charities. Harvard Business Review had an entire article that basically talked about Milton Friedman philosophy, the idea that the only social responsibility of a business is to increase its profits, and that charitable contributions should just be made to the individual stockholder, not to, charities themselves.
I thought they just did it for tax benefits.
Me too. I fully thought it was tax reasons. So, your business, the company you work for, do you think that giving back to the community around them, even if it is just charity, is that one of their responsibilities, or is their responsibility just to survive as a company?
I think the latter.
Okay. That is kind of the Milton Friedman thinking, that
it'd be nice if they did that, but only if it's not going to put them out of business.
Right.
And me out of business in that.
And also, if they're paying employees a fair wage.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amazon gives away billions of dollars and it pays their people piss.
Well, that is the part where we start making the waters pretty muddy on whether or not a company should give to charities.
Never even thought of that.
I went into this thinking that if your company, say, gives to a charity, it's nice but not necessary. But it depends on what you call charity, too. If a company like Amazon gives to the local education system and the local healthcare, like if they donate to the hospital here in town, well, then they're really just enriching the pool of their employees. Like if they say, if they give 1,000 people knee sprains, and then they go to the local hospital and donate to them, knowing that their employees are going to have to go through there and get treated. That's not so much charity as just giving to the community around you to keep your employees healthy.
It's an agenda.
Yeah. We had a whole episode about Facebook moderating, or their moderation teams going through psychological breakdowns. Well, at what point is them investing in, say, charities that help for mental health? How much of that is reinvesting in the people that they employ, or how much of that is quote unquote charity versus the thing they basically owe society because they are giving out free PTSD to their employees?
Yeah, it should be a fine, not a charity.
Right. So my thoughts on charity for corporations has changed a little bit. I am starting to lean more toward, if a company only exists to make a profit, that is fine, but they can't have so much say in their employees and the environment around them. If they want to mess with local laws like Amazon does, with them setting up anti-union systems and messing with wages and lobbying, if they want to recruit people from an entire region and reset the economy in a city, they don't get to do all that without investing something back into the place around them.
Joe, but what about them spending more money advertising what they're giving away than they're actually giving away?
Now we get into the actual charity numbers, and I'm glad you brought me back to that, because I could have gone off on this rant for another hour and a half. We don't want to see that. So, yes, companies spend a lot of money advertising how much they give away. But when you get to the rock bottom numbers, like we're just going with the pure numbers of it, the majority of the giving every year comes from the individual. Specifically, individuals each year give out about $290 billion to charity and charitable donations, and that accounts for 70% of all giving. If you look at foundations only come in at about $67 billion, so like 16% of donations. And corporations, drum roll please. No, we're not actually going to make you do a drum roll.
I was going to do it. I was looking for shit around here to pound out.
Corporations give $20 billion, or closer to $21 billion each year, about 5% of all donations.
What? It's not even close.
I'll repeat those numbers. The individuals, all individuals come in. So like you, me, all of our friends, the individuals of society, it's $287 billion. Foundations are about $67 billion. Corporations, $21 billion. So that's like a factor of 10. We're more than 10 times. The individual charities collect up 10 times what corporations do. So
we know who's selflessness and who isn't.
Yeah. And the reason why you see how generous corporations are on TV is because of what you said. They put out advertisements. They talk about it on their recruitment posters, on their commercials. If we got a commercial for just some of the individuals that give away to like charitable donations, that's a lot of commercials.
We give, my wife being an immigrant Filipino, we give to the Philippines to a lot of family members. We give at church. The one that really gets me, though, Joe, is when I go to PetSmart to get cat litter and cat food for my cat, and I see that thing that says, "Do you want to help a homeless pet?" There's no way I could say no to that.
Right.
And I've always wondered if this all goes to the CEO's salary and advertising more sides that say we help homeless pets.
The phrase homeless pet puts together two things I would give money to anyway. Those together is just, you can't get more sad and needy than a homeless pet.
Or a better person will stand in line there.
Right.
It's just too easy.
But this makes me feel good. Like, as far as every bit of research we've had in this episode, I know I love crushing people's spirits and sharing crazy studies.
It really does. He's good at it.
Every one of our studies today has just been like, companies can be more altruistic if they're more competitive about it. The individual is a bigger giver. Being altruistic makes you more sexy. I'm feeling good today. This is the last time, I swear, but this is a good one. So we kind of got a false ending with Larry and Roy. How did this actually end? There has to be an end, right? We're not. This episode isn't going to end with, and these 90-year-olds are still trading concrete mixers.
Well, as you notice, things are getting heavier.
Right.
And you're getting into spaceships. You're getting into cement trucks, cars. Well, finally, the very last thing they did, and this is crazy, they went to melt down. I'll tell you, this doesn't make any sense. They took, this was 1899. They were going to encase the pants in 10,000 pounds of molten glass poured. So they were going to get a melter, industrial melter, and pour it. But
my mind just broke trying to imagine that.
I'm just trying to think of the size. It was probably as big as our house.
It's a factory. Yeah, that's a factory pouring glass.
And the container that they got a container that was built for that. It broke. And the pants got burned and destroyed. So Roy Collette lost.
He destroyed the pants.
And the funniest thing, so they got the ashes of the pants like you would a person who had passed away. He put it in a brass urn and he gave it to Kunkel, ending the tradition 20-something years later. So you see an urn over at Kunkel's house.
It's not
is
someone's
is
grandma.
that your father? And then they tell you the whole story with pictures. Love it.
Oh man. If I were one of those brothers and I passed away, I would specifically request to be put in an urn smaller than the pants urn. I would want to be dwarfed by the prank legacy.
Selflessness might be humanity's default, which means as we age, we learn to tamp down our natural generosity so we don't go broke. If you ever watch kids in the park excitedly feeding ducks or donating toys, then you've seen our generous human nature in action. Nobody's born a Scrooge. And if you're not convinced yet, maybe this can sway you. Scientists with magnets have disrupted the planning center in people's brains, the prefrontal cortex. And guess what? When participants aren't able to rationalize why they shouldn't give away their money, they become more generous, which means it takes mental strain to think of reasons to be selfish. It takes mental work to walk past that donation bucket and not be generous. And guess what? Selfless people have higher incomes, and generous people have more children on average. And those same generous people consistently beat out corporations for charitable donations by a difference of 250 billion per year. If nothing we've said so far makes you want to give away to your favorite charity, then we have one last fact to leave you with. Selflessness is sexy, especially in a potential long-term partner, according to science. Which means we just have one question for our MacGyver gift givers, Roy Collette and Larry Kunkel. Exactly how big a wall did you have to build to keep the groupies out? You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
Connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.